All right, so I'm just going to start before I even introduce myself and just say that I'll be wearing two hats here. I'm both a panel participant and the moderator. We had another moderator who had to drop out. So as the moderator, here's the agenda for what we're going to be doing in our session. First, I'll introduce briefly the three of us. Of course, now we're going to wind up introducing ourselves, but then I'll begin my own presentation, roughly 10 minutes, after which there'll be a roughly 10-minute Q&A, which we hope will be more of an open discussion. Then I'll turn the floor over to the other two panelists who will give presentations first together and then apart, each followed by a similar Q&A sessions, after which the three of us will each give a roughly 3-minute final presentation, followed by roughly 20 to 25 minutes, depending on our timing, for Q&A and an open discussion. I will try to keep strict time. Okay, so I'm Rick Rapetti. I am a professor of philosophy at CUNY, City University of New York. I'm a vice president at the American Philosophical Practitioners Association, or APPA. I'm an APPA certified philosophical counselor. I'm a chief philosophy officer at a tech startup called KnowledgeCoin.io, which is building a decentralized knowledge base on the blockchain. I'm also a meditation instructor at the Vervaeke Foundation and author of several books and articles, mostly on the philosophy of meditation. Iris, I'll say one thing about Iris. Iris is running the Wisdom Project, which she'll tell you about in great detail. But I took the Wisdom Project along with John Vervaeke. I was so happy to be in that cohort. Iris, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a cognitive psychologist, an organizational consultant, and mindfulness teacher. I am a former engineer, so everything I conceptualize usually goes through the lens of engineering, which is the application of science to solve problems in an innovative way. And the Wisdom Project is the attempt to engineer wisdom. How can we create spaces, environments where we are led to make wise decisions?
Great. Michael Mascolo.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm Mike Moscolo. I am a professor of psychology at Merrimack College. I'm a developmental psychologist. I am also the director of a nonprofit called Creating Common Ground, which seeks to help people to bridge divides on social and political issues. I have had the honor and privilege of taking Iris's Wisdom Project and of benefiting from it. And she and I have looked at how people develop as a result of their participation in that project, and we're going to be talking about that today.
Michael, didn't your wife want you to say something?
She wanted me to say that I like caffeine-free Diet Coke and eggs is what she wanted.
Okay, I didn't want her to be disappointed if she ever watches this video. Okay, so
thank you, sir.
A little joke there, folks. All right, so I guess I'll start. Okay, as our friend John Vervaeke often likes to ask when introducing the importance of wisdom, where do you go for information first, he'll ask. And students will say, the internet. Then he asks, where do you go for knowledge? And they'll say, university. And then when he asks, where do you go for wisdom? They're not so sure. Some of them might say religion, church, whatever, but I'm going to leave that open for now. Of course, that's the topic of today. What are the differences, I will ask you to think about, though, the differences in the relationships between information, knowledge, and wisdom? I'll leave that open for now, but I'll be speaking to it as we proceed. In Plato's Meno dialogue, there's a paradox of knowledge. If you're looking for knowledge, then you lack it. But if you lack it, you can't recognize it if and when you see it. But if you have it, you don't need to look for it. On its face, this suggests we can't go from ignorance to knowledge, but we clearly do. An axiom of modal logic, the logic about the modes in which propositions may be true or false, such as possibly true, possibly false, not possibly true, which is contradiction, and not possibly false, which is a tautology, and so on, that's modal logic, is that if a proposition P is true, then P is possible or possibly true. Therefore, since we do have knowledge, but we all begin life in relative ignorance, then there must be partial knowledge, better and worse knowledge, knowledge by degree, and so on, or else acquiring knowledge would be impossible, contrary to what goes on in Plato's Meno dialogue. Clearly, we have some knowledge, so moving from ignorance to knowledge can't be impossible, because what is actual is possible. But how can we be confident that we're acquiring knowledge, particularly in this age of misinformation, in which big data, the explosion of AIs, and marketing analysts collaborate to assault us with one-sided rhetoric in order to hijack not only our attention, but our ability to reason for ourselves? The basic difference between information and knowledge is that knowledge is minimally true claims based appropriately on valid information. Maybe more than that, but it's at least that. The average person is no match against the agents of misinformation, which is why last year at this conference, I lectured about the need for a decentralized system on the transparent, immutable blockchain that incentivizes the validation of true claims and disincentivizes the assertion of false ones. A system my partners and I are developing at knowledgecoin.io, where I said before I'm the chief philosophy officer there for a few years now. With the rise of AI, we need this more than ever. I recently corrected ChatGPT repeatedly about some very straightforward errors it was making about the dating of the earliest Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan, which ChatGPT was off on by an order of magnitude. It said it was around 330 BCE, but it was around 3300 BCE. No matter how many times I clarified this for ChatGPT, it kept responding erroneously. I won't say more about the need for a system that can generate a reliable knowledge base here, since I presented it on it here last year, and anyone can go watch that if they're interested. But I bring it up because the same issues face the search for wisdom and places to go to find it. We're all here interested in wisdom. That's the topic of today. What is and isn't wisdom? Whereas knowledge requires valid information, wisdom requires knowledge, true knowledge. For one can't make a wise decision, for example, about whether or not to take a COVID vaccine or a therapeutic or anything else without knowledge of the relevant facts. Of course, facts are not enough for wisdom. But the so-called wisdom commons, including this space, the so-called liminal web, this little corner of the internet, and all of the extensions of it into the worlds of spirituality, mindfulness, self-help, life coaching, psychotherapy, philosophical counseling, which I do, and the like, it's a wild west, but one where people go for soul medicine, the most important thing for them. And they're probably more likely to be sold the equivalent of snake oil more often than not. We therefore need a certain amount of the right kind of knowledge to even know how to go about seeking sources of wisdom and practices or paths that reliably lead to what Iris Stamberger here likes to call wisening, the practices and processes that lead to the cultivation of the character traits and skills, the virtues that together inform and form degrees of wisdom. When it comes to understanding the process of wisening, an excellent place to begin is with the ABCs of virtue theory, as my friend and the president of the APPA, Lou Marinoff, likes to call them. That is, Aristotle, Buddha, and Confucius, ABC, each of which agree that a virtue is a midpoint between the extremes of excess and deficiency with respect to any given character trait that we consider a virtue. Aristotle's classic example is courage, which on his analysis is the midpoint between too much and too little fear of danger. Too little is foolhardy, and too much is paranoia or cowardice. This is the so-called doctrine of the golden mean. The Buddha's classic example is the calibration of a guitar string. Too tight and it will break, too loose and it won't produce a sound. All three virtue theorists agree that virtues, that is, good character traits, are cultivated through practice. One becomes a good guitar player by playing the guitar repeatedly, a courageous person by engaging in courageous acts, and so on. Martial artists, for example, train to deal with danger, potential injury, combat pain, and so on. And the more they practice, the better they get. They're cultivating courage. What makes a character trait good? That depends. For Aristotle, the word good has a relative and an objective component. It's relative to what kind of thing a thing is, whether it's a good one of its kind. But given whatever kind of thing a thing is, objectively, whether it's a good one of its kind is also objective. Aristotle's classic example is a knife. What is a knife? It's a stabbing and cutting instrument. Given that purpose, some knives are better designed than others for that purpose. Those that are sharp and pointy are better than those that aren't. Sharpness and pointiness are excellences of a good knife or powers of it. These characteristics express its powers or virtues. The Greek term arete is the term for virtue. It has three meanings, though: power, excellence, and virtue. What kinds of things are people? For Aristotle, and I'll get back to those three meanings. For Aristotle, we're rational socio-political animals. Like a knife, right? A virtuous person is one who has developed those character traits and abilities that are relevant to the purposes of being rational social animals. Rationality, prosociality, civic conscientiousness, and so on. And the virtues are those traits of character that support those intentions. The Greeks saw wisdom as the highest virtue uniting all the others. Here's what I think is the best reason for this view. The ability to know exactly what the midpoint is between any two extremes, for example, with courage or anything else, requires wisdom. Aristotle didn't leave it there. We need wisdom to calibrate the golden mean, but we also need to follow his so-called right rule, which is more of a heuristic than a rule. We need to discern what the right thing to do is at the right time and place, with the right people, under the right circumstances, and for the right reason. There are no algorithms for that, which is why wisdom is not a thing, but rather wisening is a developing skill set composed of the cultivation of all the virtues through repeated practice. Now, in the same way that UTOKcon, the company I'm working on, is developing a system for building a reliable knowledge base that can help anyone circumvent the Meno paradox for their own acquisition of knowledge, we need a system that can help anyone acquire the minimal knowledge necessary to know where to reliably go to find methods, practices, frameworks, and trainings that reliably cultivate the virtues necessary for wisening. That knowledge, once established, can be included in the knowledge base. My friends and colleagues here, Iris Stamberger and Michael Mascolo, are precisely developing tools for wisening, that's more Iris, and for assessing and measuring the extent to which various practices do and do not actually cultivate wisening, and that's Michael. So I'll be happy to now, that's good. I did it in 9 minutes out of my 10. So I'll be happy to now entertain Q&A for about 10 minutes, and then I'll turn it over to Iris. And
Mr. Michael, no? First Mike and then me.
Yeah, but first Q&A, right? We're going to do Q&A
Yes, yes.
segment here. So let me set my timer again.
Well, I want to start by just being very, very thankful that you are using the term wisening, because people have resisted it. So basically, Michael, that's it. It's their wisening. We are working towards wisening. Okay.
Iris, I'll just say, you might have heard in the beginning, someone brought in that word megalopsyche, because I was saying at the end of our last session, we need a word for the process of using justification justly or virtuously. We don't have a word for it. Having the right word helps us to think clearly about things. All right. Language can limit and restrict and constrain us, but it can also enable and afford. And when we don't have the right words, we're at a loss. So, okay, the floor is open now. Anybody can just unmute. You don't even have to raise a hand. We want this to be more of a dialogue. I think Michael especially is encouraging us to do it that way. So I'll give kudos to him for encouraging us to do that. So contribute any thoughts, questions, comments, curiosity, and that includes the other panelists here. Just unmute and speak. Justin?
Thank you.
Oh, it's a thumbs up, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I was wondering if you wanted to zoom into the overlap. You used the term commons, where you can develop wisdom, and then the kind of knowledge and the skills and practices and processes for developing wisdom, right? Could you zoom in on how the social context interacts with the tools, the exercises, the processes that people go through as kind of technologies for cultivating wisdom?
And not only me, but anybody on the panel or anybody else in the room can answer anybody's questions here.
Goodness, for me, that's like the question. I'm not going to answer it because I'm going to answer it in my talk. It's going to be exactly what I'm going to be talking about. Great question.
The question brings me to that little book, imperfect book, that Francisco Varela wrote, I think in 2001, called Ethical Know-How, where he describes how we are continuously copying, acting the best we can in the different micro worlds that we penetrate. So the intent of practicing wisening and creating wise decisions is practice throughout all the micro worlds we enter. I just did my taxes, and that was an opportunity. I'm here now, and that's an opportunity. I'm going to visit my ailing mom and my sometimes in conflict sisters after this talk, and that's another opportunity for wisening. And in every opportunity that I have for wisening, I always have tools that I can use to make my decision-making more effective.
I think one of the things I'll be wanting to say, the question was about the social context and as related to tools. It's possible to develop all types of tools to develop wisdom. It's possible to try to study wisdom, quote unquote, scientifically. Ultimately, what I want to argue is that wisdom is a social process. It's a process of social evaluation, and we can never talk about wisdom independent of the social and cultural process of evaluation. Rick, you wanted to say something. I think I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, that's totally related to what you said. One of the main themes that came up in our last session, we did a dialectic to dialogos, which is a kind of Socratic proposal and midwifing, proposing and midwifing, like Socrates and his interlocutors, about what makes the use of justification virtuous or vicious, right? And we don't have a name for the virtuous use of the process of justification, but it is still a virtue. Having the skill of only giving justifications that are appropriate and just is that's a kind of virtue that some people have and others lack. Sophistry is a kind of failure of that, or the opposite of it in a way, right? Rationalizations and bullshit and persuading and whatnot. I lost my train of thought, but yeah. So now I remember.
Maybe you could call it legitimizing.
One moment. The one of the things that came up there is that human beings are agents, and we're constantly making decisions and choices. Like what Iris was saying, I have an opportunity of wisening when I visit my family or when I'm doing my taxes. In almost any decision that we make, there's an opportunity for wisening or bullshitting ourselves, or, So what are the tools? Iris has a whole bunch of tools. Michael's going to talk about it. I have some that I'll talk about in my 3 minutes at the end. I don't want to spoiler alert too much, so I won't say what the tools are. But yeah.
Sorry for jumping in before. I wanted to highlight legitimizing in the good sense as a potential virtue, right? Showing legitimacy of something and how it's kind of properly revered, or maybe revering or worshiping. Or maybe that vector could be where the words may hide.
Yeah, no, that's an important component because, we have this new concept, relatively new, that is becoming, at least as Michael said, we're in a social context all the time. The idea of legitimate government or legitimate authority, right? Legitimacy is very important in this age, right? In the age of misinformation, so much information sharing is illegitimate. Legitimacy is a key component of this justificatory process. And I forget how you worded it, Michael, but you used something about the social nature and the total interdependency of us all in this kind of network of reasons, which is human culture.
Mm-hmm. That's well put. Well put.
Anyone else?
I might ask a quick question about collectively, I'll use the United States as an example. What are preparatory methods or procedures or social stigmagy, things that are already moving in our society that can help open up space for wisdom to be attractive in the first place, especially to people under 30 or 25. So if that helps.
What a question. Wow, I'm going to answer the opposite. What's stopping us? in my opinion, what stops us from moving toward wisdom is massive meist radical individualism, where we have moved away from conceptions of virtue, of anything that is sacred, toward relativistic notions in which we seek the good, we seek what is moral in our individual selves. And that strikes me as the exact opposite of what moral means or what wisdom is. Wisdom must be done in relation to other people. And the more we pull apart from each other, the less likely we're able to engage in wisdom. I'm sorry, it's the opposite of what you asked.
Well, in my view, the fact that we are confronted with so many wicked problems that are difficult to frame and whose solution eludes us, makes us to look for something else beyond the accumulation of knowledge. I live in Massachusetts. 96% of the adult population has a high school degree, 50% has a graduate degree, 25% of the population, the adult population, has a graduate master degrees or above, and that doesn't make us wiser. That doesn't make us.
And I don't know, ontology is being, so that's probably the kind of truth that you're talking about. Ontology or ontological is
Audrey,
dealing with the nature of being.
Audrey,
Set of concepts and categories and a subject.
I just muted Audrey. I don't think she realized that she was speaking into the mic. Sorry about that. Mitya, you want to continue with what you were saying?
No. I was just inviting the meeting.
I'll just quickly thank Michael for answering in a contrarian way, because that's kind of what I was suggesting by the question is we are, as John points out all the time, we're in a wisdom famine, and it's all about intelligence, and we're trying to tech intelligence our way out of the Malachian debt that we owe for, all these things. So anyway, thank you for answering that.
Yeah, in the last session, folks, I asked everybody to mute themselves, or maybe we might have to mute everybody.
No, that's okay.
All right. Yeah, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself, because otherwise this is an interference.
Rick, I can proctor that if you want. If you just make me a co-host, I'll monitor the muting if you can't do it.
That's okay. I can tell who made the noise and then I mute them. I just didn't want to mute everybody, but I can mute everybody and allow them to unmute themselves. Let me do it that way. Mute all. Allow participants. Okay, so now everyone is muted, but they can unmute themselves when they want to speak. But that we are right exactly at the 10-minute mark. So here's my timer. So, Michael, I think you're next. Yeah, correct?
You might need to unmute yourself if you're speaking.
Michael, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you for whoever said that to me.
Yeah. Okay. So
just a moment. Okay, here we are. Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here talking about this. I want to talk about the work that Iris and I have done together. I want to call this What Wisdom Is and Isn't, and how to promote it of an evaluative model. Much of what I'm going to be talking about has reference to do with the quote unquote scientific study of wisdom, which has been going on in psychology and the social sciences for quite some time now. And I want to be somewhat critical of that, while at the same time prosing a way of how it is that we can study wisdom, how it is that we can understand it, and how it is that we can promote it. So we could start with the question, what is wisdom? And I feel that it's kind of an unfortunate question. It's an unfortunate question because the question, what is wisdom, creates a false impression that wisdom is something, it's some is that could be studied scientifically, that could be observed and measured. And a lot of psychologists are going about the process of trying to do just that. There's wisdom out there in the world, and we take our lens and we take our measuring devices and we can find out what wisdom is by looking very carefully. I think that that is not quite right. As a noun, we use wisdom. The word wisdom fools us into thinking it's a kind of a thing that can be observed. But perhaps it's better to think of wisdom in its adjectival or adverbial form. That wasn't a wise thing to do, wise rather than wisdom. That wasn't a wise thing to do. Wise is an evaluative term. It's not a thing out there in the world, it's an evaluation. And therein lies the rub if we want to study it scientifically, because we're going to run into some pretty big problems. Here's an evaluative concept of what might be called wise action. This is an evaluative model that Iris and I are working on. And it starts right from the center that if you're going to have wisdom, you have to make reference to some sort of moral framework, some notion of goodness, right, wrong, worthy, unworthy. And this leads to having some sort of purpose, a moral purpose, a goal that's worthy of having. I cannot make a wise judgment or engage in wise deliberation unless I have some moral framework, and if that deliberation is relative to some purpose or goal that's worthy. If I'm engaging in wise deliberation, I have to think, and that means I have to have some representation of the problem I'm solving. And I suggest that that requires that I understand the shared and contested needs and goals of everyone involved in the problem, all the stakeholders. I must have a suite of relevant knowledge and skills in order to solve the problem. And then on the basis of that, I need to make a choice. And that choice has to be born of not just one option. I have to have multiple options. I have to be able optimally to anticipate the potential options or the outcomes of those options, both in the short and the long term. And then I act. And then, of course, I can assess the outcomes of my action and see whether or not I want to change the way I think. That's a lot. So this is why wisdom is such a complex and rare thing. It requires an awful lot of coordinated knowledge and skills, but also a moral framework that we need to articulate. Here's another way of seeing the same thing, as far as I suggest, is that here's wisdom. Here's a person, there's no person here, but imagine a person standing right here. And this person sees the good, has some conception of the good, and has some goals represented by that star. And that star is what's worth having. And the person who is engaged in wise action or wise deliberation is able to see far, identify those worthy ends, and can see wide, size up the terrain, and then be able to understand, have the skills and knowledge in order to get to the good by avoiding obstacles and addressing needs and using resources. There's wisdom, in my opinion. Now, I hope you could see this. It's not clear on my screen, the top here. Here's some problems with the scientific study of wisdom. First, we have something called the fact-value distinction. Scientists like to study what is. That's what science is all about. It's an inquiry about finding out what is. And so scientists see themselves as making objective observations using facts, observable data, unbiased observations that describe events putatively the way they are. That's what science is supposed to be. However, wisdom is not just that. Wisdom is directed toward making decisions about what is good. What psychologists often do when they're studying wisdom scientifically is that they're trying to get at wisdom as if it were something that could be studied objectively. I say it cannot. Wisdom is directed at making decisions about what is good, which involves evaluations, which involves conceptions of what ought to be. And what ought to be is the wise aspect of the process that is informed by facts and that sort of thing. You can't do wisdom with just observations and facts. And you can't study wisdom as if it were an objective thing in the world. That's the first problem we've got to overcome, it seems to me, if we're going to study wisdom at all, is this fact-value distinction. Related to that is one cannot study wisdom without invoking value judgments. This is the fact-value distinction I'm talking about. Related to that is the naturalistic fallacy. Again, when people study wisdom objectively, they're studying it as if it were something in the world, something that is what is. This is what wisdom is. I look at it, I find out by looking. But the problem with the naturalistic fallacy is whatever you find by looking, whatever people say wisdom is, or whatever you're observing, you can't get from the facts on the ground to evaluations and what ought to be. Wisdom lies in the area of what ought to be, not simply what is. And so knowing what is doesn't tell us what should be. You can't study wisdom scientifically just by looking. That's what I'm suggesting. So again, back to this evaluative conception of wise action. If you're going to study wisdom, you can study the representation of the problem, relevant wisdom supporting skills and knowledge, how people make choices, their outcomes, all of that you can study scientifically, but you're not going to be able to study whether a goal is worth having in terms of a moral framework scientifically. This requires something beyond scientific understanding. So if that's true, can we study wise action systematically at all? I suggest that the answer is yes, but we need an intersubjective rather than simply scientific or naturalistic or objectivist approach to understanding what wisdom is. Here's what an intersubjective approach might look like. Well, we start with the idea that descriptive and evaluative frameworks, evaluations, those things that make wisdom, the wise. Descriptive and evaluative frameworks come from the cultural histories of sign-mediated relational experience. They're human things. They're products of language and experience and interaction and reflection. So if we're going to talk about wisdom, we got to start with two people talking, using words. And where do they get those words and those word meanings? Not from their minds, not from the world, but from already existing and evolving intersubjective values, beliefs, and knowledge that's already shared and contested to some degree. And then what they do is that they use those words and those ideas to refer to things in the world. And then they reflect upon whether these things are good or bad or what have you. And so she says, it's not wise to stack them in that way. And he says, well, that depends on why we want to stack them. And the conversation goes on. Here's where wisdom lies, in our discursive, evolving evaluations of what is good over time. So, if you will, toward an intersubjective approach to studying wisdom, let's look at what psychologists do and define as wisdom. Take a look. Again, if we have this value fact distinction here, psychology or science is supposed to be in this area of empirical fact and testable theory, whereas I'm suggesting wisdom, much of it takes place in this area and realm of the axiological, the values. Here's the way some people talk about wisdom. Approach one: measurable psychological traits, abilities, knowledge, and skills. This is the definition. Wisdom may be defined as a complex human trait with several specific components: social decision-making, emotion regulation, pro-social behavior, self-reflection, acceptance of uncertainty, decisiveness, and spirituality. Wow. I mean, that's talking, in my view, of everything that is observable and studyable, except the wisdom component of it. There's no wise notion in there. It's entirely in the area of what we can, quote unquote, see.
Michael, just so you know, that was 10 minutes, but finish.
I will. Thank you.
Continue.
Thank you, sir. The second approach, Grossman and others, is in the middle here. Morally grounded psychological processes. Morally grounded application of metacognition to reasoning and problem solving. This is getting a little bit closer to an intersubjective approach, it seems to me, but we're still looking at what wisdom is: metacognitive reasoning. It's morally grounded. Here's an example of something that bridges, I suggest, the fact-value distinction. Sternberg's balance theory, say what you wish about the triad, is a process model that specifies how various personal attributes are utilized to produce wise thought and behavior. Sternberg's is one of a few set of theories that really clearly articulates the difference between what can be studied psychologically and the value presuppositions that are necessary and evolve over time in order to constitute wise decision-making. I will stop there because that's enough, and we will go to discussion.
Great. So, folks, once again, please unmute yourself if you have a question or comment, or you want to speak in any way.
I'll jump in just quickly on one point. This morning, Bonita Roy distinguished between the true and the real. The true being more in your realm of facts and what science can work with, and that there's more to reality than just that. And perhaps wisdom has to do with working in that other realm. And I would posit, contrary to what you're saying, that there's another kind of wisdom. You might say the wisdom of the Buddha, of the Bodhisattva, who doesn't have to go through all sorts of mental gymnastics to act, but will act in a way that is appropriate in the moment.
May I?
Stop there.
May I?
Sure.
I suffer no loss of identity by aligning what I was saying with Buddhist thinking, but dharma, karma, right action. These are all social concepts that have developed over centuries of time that have become internalized. Goodness me, they strike me as quite the essential. Maybe it's automatic and it's immediate, and I've internalized it. But my goodness, there's an awful lot of conceptual content and evaluative content to that.
I would posit that there is a state of being where one is so connected with all that's going on that the amount of information that's being used to act without conscious intent is vastly beyond what someone who's thinking about it when particular frameworks can gather in and put into the situation.
Frederick.
I'll say one thing that I think eliminates any appearance of conflict between these two little trains of thought, and that is that the Buddha is a kind of exemplar of somebody who has attained such a high level of skill at being wise that it comes spontaneously to the Buddha. This is just like somebody who has attained such a level of skill that they can perform a dance without thinking at all, as opposed to someone who has to remember the next step or something like that. That's what it's a skill. Wisdom is a skill, or wisening is a process that leads to increased skill. And whether or not somebody actually exists on that level, it's a theoretical possibility, which is grounded in the kind of history that Michael was talking about. I haven't met an enlightened being. I've met beings who seem to be close, but I don't know. Once a student asked me and a colleague, we were co-teaching a course on this stuff, and he said, how do you know if someone's enlightened? And my partner, the other teacher, said, ask their spouse. All right. So if anybody's, and I met a Zen master, an alleged Zen master's wife once at the funeral service for Swami Satchidananda. Afterwards, we were all having dinner, and this person mentioned her last name. And I thought, oh, there's a Zen master with the same name. And then in dinner, she mentioned her husband by first name. I said, is that the Zen master? And she went like this. Yeah. So I haven't met a Buddha yet, but yeah, theoretically possible. I don't know.
That's why I like Francisco Varela, the author of the Embodied Mind book. He was also a meditator. He just says ethical know-how is about effective coping in the so many numerous micro worlds that we visit every day. And it doesn't have to be like the Buddha, but if you go to a restaurant, you know how to behave. If you go to do the taxes, you know how to behave, etc.
How do you say your name, sir?
Sigurd?
Sigurd,
yes. You look like Krishnamurti to me, so at least you look like an enlightened being. So you're the closest we've got.
Yeah, and when I said I don't know if there's an enlightened being, I still aspire to that as if there is. Ashay, you have your hand up. You want to unmute?
Yes, thank you. So I had a question about the difference between intelligence and wisdom. And I actually found the evaluative framework that you shared very useful because it showed moral goodness or kind of a moral framework at the center. So is it fair to think of intelligence as essentially the same process? Because you could imagine intelligent people having a purpose, figuring out the problem, taking an action, and then evaluating, but without that value that kind of grounds it at the center. Is that the key difference, or is there more to it between intelligence and wisdom?
Well, I'm not sure I know exactly what intelligence means. I know that the way people talk about it is very singular and monolithic, and that makes me uncomfortable. But I like what you said. I mean, the more quote unquote cognitive skills that we have, the more able we are to engage in the types of reflective practices that we might call components of wisdom. But I think you're right. It's the moral framework and the capacity to identify what's worth having and how to get there that's going to define what wise is. I don't know if people are familiar with the American sitcom All in the Family that was there many, many years ago. And I wouldn't call her particularly wise, but Edith Bunker was certainly good. She wasn't particularly intelligent, but she exhibits the type of moral goodness, that simplicity that I think we could all use, even if we don't have the intelligence.
Yeah, something about your definition about utilizing a kind of, I forget what word you use. You emphasize the word utilizing. So you could have intelligence about many things which have nothing to do with interpersonal or even intrapersonal flourishing, let's just say. Whereas wisdom seems to be applying intelligence in those domains. That would be something that might help answer your question a little, Ashay. Just riffing a little bit on the possible answers. Anyone else? Well, that's good. Then we can just go ahead and we could have more time for the total Q&A at the end. So even though you went over a little, Michael, we still have 2 minutes left in the 10-minute that would have been all Q&A had you not used up the first 2 minutes. So great.
He reprimanded me twice.
No, I didn't mean it that way. I'm just, I want to be a good timekeeper. So Iris, I believe it's you now. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So what is the Wisdom Project? The Wisdom Project is a standardized pedagogical protocol. I started in 2022, and I have done so far 15 cohorts of this 7-week, 2 hours every week course. And hopefully by the fall of this year, I'm launching a teacher training certification so people can replicate the protocol. And hopefully next year during the spring, I'm launching a consulting framework. I have already helped 2 participants implement the Wisdom Project in their particular community of interest, but it's really intensive work. So I hope to have the framework so I don't have to do it one by one. The background for the Wisdom Project is my own experience with Goenka-ji Vipassana protocol. Vipassana or mindfulness or insight meditation is a 10-day, very intensive mindfulness retreat where he has also teachers who help the new practitioners. I'm also, for almost 20 years, a teacher of mindfulness-based stress reduction. Currently, I teach at a research program at Beth Israel, Harvard-affiliated hospital here in Boston. And this protocol in 8 weeks has proven to be very effective in delivering results in a series of chronic conditions like back pain, asthma, eczema, etc. And now they are doing long COVID. We are doing all types of things with this very simple protocol. So I wanted a simple protocol, which is something I did for organizations as an organizational consultant in 2008. And I call it a change management protocol, but it was basically a protocol to help people improve the way they learn at work, which is not easy because of the cognitive rigidity that comes when we become experts or professionals. So we managed with this Talbot protocol, train 5,000 professors by training 120 certified teachers. So this experience is what I'm using with the design of the Wisdom Project. So tools for thinking are crucial in what I call the wisening process. There are a few names for it. The first person who proposed the term mindware was David Perkins, but Nisbet, another psychologist, has a book called Mindware, Tools for Smart Thinking. Andy Clark, one of the scientists and philosophers that propelled the concept of extended or embedded cognition, that is now, the main paradigm in cognitive science, called the 4E paradigm. He also has a book with a name. Perkins, that I already mentioned, wrote a book called Mindware in 1996. And Daniel Dennett, who has greatly impacted the way I think about these things, he says, we are tools all the way down, that cognition is just tools all the way down. And he has this fantastic book, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking. In the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, John Vervaeke says he is going to call mindware, explicitly he says the mindware psychotechnologies, and as a good wordsmith that he explains the difference. And also Stanovich, who works on reason, has an important taxonomy of mindware in a 2018 paper. So all of this is what we call the tools or the mindware in the Wisdom Project, and they are vital for the process of wisening. Some of the mindware is just, I'm not going to go with everything on detail, but are John Vervaeke's own cognitive styles of wisdom, Igor Grossman, the Solomon paradox, Tanya Singer, intersubjective meditation. She's a affective neuroscientist at the Planck Institute in Germany, and I have adapted her work as one of the tools of mindware that we use in the Wisdom program. So there are a total of 40 tools, but the Wisdom Project is very participatory. I don't go in detail with the explanation of these tools. So it's a game similar to the glass bead game where you learn by practicing. It's a participatory experience based on all these tools. So what are the proposals of the Wisdom Project? First, to accept that wisdom could become a verb, the activity of wisening, to wisen, the act of cultivating wise decision-making. So we engage in wisening by improving our decision-making thanks to the mindware, the tools for thinking, the psychotechnologies, whatever we want to call them. And a basic component, that's another proposal of the development of wise decision-making that I rely on the Wisdom Project, is the concept of psychological distancing, that when we separate ourselves from something, from the self, we take temporal distance or physical distance, we perceive different aspects of the problem. And Eleanor Roach, many, many years ago, proved that concept, and now it has become, thanks to the work of Thorpe and Lieberman, more accessible, more accessible in psychology. Another important element is what I call emotional landscaping, the ability to sculpt emotions, and we play a lot, even though it's a secular program, with the emotions of the sacred, such as reverence, joy, enchantment, wonder, so that we have somehow separated ourselves from them because they belong to the realm of the religious or the spiritual. We play with them a lot, doing emotional landscaping on the Wisdom Project. And last but not least, an important proposal of the Wisdom Project is, as I said at the beginning, it is possible to engineer decision-making spaces where you practice wisening. So here in the Wisdom Project, I'm talking about wisening of the individual, but wisening also of the relationships in the family, in the workplace, etc. So we create the spaces where, following Francisco Valera, we do effective coping by practicing ethical know-how. So the wisening approach, then, I repeat, is engineering wise decision-making through the selection of a wicked problem, a problem that is incomplete, contradictory, and changing in its requirements, such as improving the relationship with my sister. And we follow what I call the care package, engaging in collaborative conversations, having agents that participate, being accountable for whatever happens, including the learning of others, envisioning what is the reward in this case, solving or achieving or delivering the wicked project, but also what are the risks involved on that. And again, I already mentioned those two, emotional landscaping and psychological distancing. I call this care package self-parenting. We are engaging in self-parenting as we commit to the journey of wisening. And the method, what is that we do when we get together? We follow what I call the real method. We do ritual, like the shamans did, but also like the engineers do right now in corporations, that they run rituals in the morning, so they deliver products with less buggy features. They deliver better products. So we engage in a ritual. Every session is similar to the next at the same format to create psychological safety. And by being in the ritual, we engage with artifacts, these mindware or mind tools that I'm talking about, in pursuit of what? Why? The liminal, that state of disorientation that people go through when they go from being engaged to being married, when they go from being a student to having the degree. So we look for that space of transformation where we become wiser. And the wisdom is then measured by our ability to make effective decisions vis-a-vis our project. And I call that the foundations of the wisdom project. The results are the fact that, and I hope Michael has the opportunity to speak more about that, the work we did together. I compiled interviews done before, during, after, and then 6 months later with a group of 15 or 16 participants of the Wisdom Project. And we saw that the components of the common model of wisdom that was developed by Grossman and 8 other researchers. Yes, time is over.
That was 10 minutes. Keep going though.
Quickly, what we found that these two components of the common model of wisdom are expressed by participants of the Wisdom Project in terms of these 4 wisdom supporting skills that we call the FAV skill set. Perspectives, accepting different perspectives and being able to synthesize them, having humility, being able to adapt to the circumstances, coping, as Varela would say, and expressing more and more virtue. So the next step for the Wisdom Project is to continue doing research, hopefully not only with Michael, with other people that find this framework interesting, launching continuously courses. The new courses are starting February 26th at different hours, so people from all over the world can engage, and creating consulting modules where people can start listening in their community. Okay, so I have some slides that I was hoping Mike would present, but we'll see.
Okay. So we open the floor again. Maybe stop the share, Iris.
Yes, I'm doing
Rick,
that.
you can do that if you'd like. I think that our plan was that I would then show the work we did in evaluating.
Oh, you're going to go for 10 minutes now? Okay.
Hopefully less. Hopefully less.
Okay.
We'll be better to have conversation.
Okay. So go ahead, Michael.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike.
So what I want to talk about now is the research that we did on Iris's program. So this was a 7 or 8 week process, as she described it. Let's talk about how wisdom supporting skills, and if you will, perhaps even the capacity for wise decision making developed over the course of those 8 weeks. So again, the Wisdom Project was assessing wisdom-related skills and wise deliberation. There were 14 people who had participated in the project that we analyzed. We looked at at people's reflections on various wisdom-related skills that Iris just talked about: humility, adaptability, integration of perspectives, virtue, and also goals and accomplishments that they had. She gave an interview before the course, during the course, immediately after the course, and then several months after the course. I won't go into the interview, just saying, here it is. This is what it looks like. And this is how we analyze development. We analyze development using dynamic skill theory, which is a model of skill development. It allows us to trace the structure and the developmental of any skill over time within a context and domain. And the way it works is, if you've got the data that we have here, we're focusing on abstract thoughts over time and the structure of abstract thoughts over time. I'll go through this and you'll get it hopefully very quickly without my having to explain it in detail. But at one level, you've got single abstractions. We're represented as an A or a B, where a person says, I am more civilized. Civilized is one abstract idea. At the next level of single abstractions, you have people having multiple single abstractions. My goals are to be resourceful, responsible, and resilient. That's the first and second level, if you will. Then it goes to a fundamentally different level. Abstract mappings, in which what you get here is relations between two abstractions. A person might say, I became less of a mom and more like a companion, comparing mom to companion in a relationship. And those abstract mappings can get more complex. Before, I could not think clearly, but now there's a relation. As a result of another relation, the Wisdom Project, my mental fog is gone. More complex concept. And then the highest level we're looking at is abstract systems, in which you take two abstract mappings and put them together into a single structure. To transform, the dynamic balance between the present and the past needs to be held. If you let go of your current identity, then there's nothing to transform. You must hold onto your pattern, but loose enough to see the new pattern. So what we have here is 5 different levels of sophistication of thinking over time, represented by skill theory. So here's changes over time in the level of complexity of the general reasoning processes that Iris found in each of these 4 steps. Prior to the participation, it was at one level, and then you get slow development over time. Even in the course of 8 weeks, you're getting some pretty significant changes there. If you break it down into the various wisdom-related skills, it looks like this, so that people are starting off not talking very sophisticatedly about any adaptability or accomplishments, some degree of coordinating perspectives, and a reasonably high level of goals. You'd expect that because they're starting off with goals. Surprising to us, there was a level of humility that was constant throughout the whole thing. But what developed was the capacity for perspective taking and the capacity to represent alternative strategies for getting things done, adaptability. In addition, they felt that they were more accomplished, and they talked about these things in higher order levels over time. So this is real, genuine structural development over time. The actual structure and developmental level of thinking is transformed. But that's just the development of wisdom-related skills. That's not wisdom. That's their reflections on their skills. What about wisdom? Is there any evidence for the development of wise deliberations or wise action or wise reasoning? Well, again, as I've suggested, that can't be discussed without reference to some form of values which are not objective. So what's a wise decision? As I suggested before, for any given problem, informed by some conception of the good, a wise decision is one that maximizes the good over the bad in both the short and long term, across the full range of concerns and constituencies that define a problem. Looks like that, which I've already talked to you about before. A wise decision is one in which all these elements are present. These blue ones, I hope this is blue, I'm colorblind. These blue ones are representations of moral values that are not objective. And if this, to the extent that we have all of these things here coordinated together, I'm suggesting that that might be evidence toward more wise deliberations. So what have we got? Here's an example. Here's one participant who we would suggest has developed tendency toward increasing wisdom. Starts off early on with very low levels of reasoning about virtue and adaptability, some level of perspective taking, which develops over time, and humility, which develops over time. And if you see the diagram here, it's that diagram looking here, all I want to draw your attention to is these little bidirectional arrows. Everything here is integrated together. All the components of the skill development are integrated together. I don't have time to go into the specifics, but that's what I want to draw your attention to as an example of what we would call applying this evaluative framework, the structure of evaluations, to the data. Here's an example of a less developed, a non-developed, someone who did not develop wise reasoning over the course of the project. You look at these curves here. The curves are going in all different types of directions, and it's not terribly systematic. The perspectives are actually fluctuating over time. You're getting development of some conception of virtue, but the big thing is right here. You look here at these things here. This person has certain goals, has certain values, has certain interests, but they're not fully integrated with each other in that person's protocol. They are systematic and fragmented. This is a struggling individual. And here's an example of someone who's in progress, if you will. And again, the measure of wisdom, again, I'm making it a qualitative one rather than the quantitative one because of its evaluative nature. Again, we've got some changes in adaptability, changes in perspective, changes in virtue, high levels of humility representation. And we have a lot of integration over here with some exceptions here. This person is still in progress. So conclusions. Wisdom is not a trait or set of psychological abilities that can be studied scientifically independent of an evaluative framework. Studying wisdom requires an intersubjective and interdisciplinary approach, not a singular, naturalistic, or objective one. Wisdom isn't something you can detect objectively. To speak of wisdom is to speak of the quality of a kind of decision or an act. We should be speaking of wise rather than wisdom, I suggest, and articulating our judgments within the context of the evolving, never-ending cultural, relational conversation about what is good. Wisdom supporting skills like perspective taking, humility, adaptability, etc., and wise decisions themselves can be scaffolded and cultivated through continuous and supportive reflexive action. Thank you.
That was great, Michael. Thank you. So now we have another 10-minute period for Q&A. And you were right, because even though Iris went into the 10-minute period that you were going to go, you finished with a minute and a half plus left over. So that's great. So we're on schedule. We're a little ahead of schedule. So let's start the clock again. We've got 10 minutes of Q&A. Same thing, popcorn style. You don't have to raise your hand. Just unmute yourself and question, comment, contribute, share. Oh, Greg, good to see you here.
Lovely to be here. I caught the end of it. I definitely have some thoughts, but I'm going to pause a second and collect them. Share.
I've got a question. I put something in the chat. May I ask?
Please.
Thank you. I put something in the chat about this integration, and I loved your schematic with the arrows indicating that wisdom is kind of correlated or related to higher levels of integration. And that concurs with the work of people like Daniel Siegel and his work on attachment and interpersonal neurobiology and healing of our emotional triggers, really. And it involves that distanciation, establishing some inner organization and inner home. And I was wondering if you've made these linkages to affect, because wisdom in my work I see is quite largely a function of the ability to self-regulate around triggers. You're on mute.
Yes, absolutely. Affect affect precedes cognition. Affect precedes evaluation. Affect is probably the means of a primary means of evaluation. So I think that you're absolutely right. And you can't develop wisdom alone. It has to be in relation to other people through discourse in affective contexts. It's we didn't have that data available to us, and boy, do I wish we had it, because I think that it's a rich thing. We should be able to see, when there's struggle in the deliberation and the difficulty of integrating. We should be able to see when people are struggling between people in their discourse, and then I would predict, when the feelings of insight come and feelings of awe and wonder and that sort of thing, the person's going to look and express very differently. So I can't tell you how excited I am about your comment.
So the way that I approach affect in the Wisdom Project is the way that Lisa Feldman Barrett does it, with the affective circumplex and the balance of high arousal, low arousal, positive or negative balance, and then sharing with people that that's what it is, this basic affect level. And then emotions, according to this new theory, are constructed socially. That all, I used to teach Psychology 101, and that thing that the emotions are 5 types of emotions, that they are shared by all cultures, that falls. So it's an invitation to people to construct emotions under the umbrella of emotional landscaping, and they start doing it seriously. And there is a sense of well-being that, not a sense of well-being, there is well-being that develops. And right now we are discussing with other colleagues what exactly is what generates that sense of, or that the well-being that we see coming through the 4 interviews, people sharing their experience.
Greg, Greg has.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Greg.
No, go ahead. So you can do a follow-up, Ingrid. Greg will be next, please.
Thank you. Iris, from what you're saying, it sounds as though it's quite a top-down model where the social construction it's conceptual rather than at a neurobiological level, in terms of our co-regulation at a nervous system level, of how we are establishing safety at a precognitive level. And it's on that basis that we're able to be more virtuous. I don't know if you know about like polyvagal theory and that kind of thing, but we're able to be more virtuous when we're not being triggered. And then there's a short circuit between affect and behavior, rather than being able to tolerate our distress, stay within that window of tolerance, and be able to deliberate about what options are available to us. So I see it as more top-down, bottom-up than this cognitive awareness of affect. I don't know if you...
The thing is that we cultivate interoception seriously, the ability to sense yourself, through the tool called the body scan. So people start noticing those little, in Goenka Vipassana model, is called impurities. In the liminal study a liminal perspective in psychology, is called disorientation. So that disorientation guides you, but the feeling, if you enrich your interoception, is there to guide the emotion.
I'd like to make a comment about that, please. Feldman's model of emotion has its origins, believe it or not, in the old Schachter-Singer model of emotion, which says that there's a generalized state of arousal, and then cognition is what leads you to understand and experience an emotion in one or another way. And to be sure, higher level emotions are socially created in that way. But that model simply does not answer and is not able to explain the massive differentiation in emotion and emotional expression early in infancy, or the ubiquity of what people call these more basic emotions, which do have an epigenetic grounding. I think you need both the type of thing that Ingrid is talking about, and the type of thing that with the two eyes are talking about, and they come together. That's where you get a rich emotion, I suggest.
Greg, and then Sigurd, please.
Yeah, so I would love to hear you guys talk a little bit about kind of. So I put this sort of in the category, the very broad category of psychotherapy. And what I meant by that is, like, when I became a psychological doctor, I had sort of the axiological problem of what am I actually valuing and what am I valuing to cultivate. And Rick, this goes to you also as a philosopher, counseling philosopher. What is our role, what we're trying to do, and certainly the concept of wisdom and reflecting about and orienting toward valued states of being in a co-constructed reality was ultimately a way I gripped that. So I guess one of the things that I would like to hear you guys think about is like how do you as educator, how do you as guide, how do you as engineer, how do you as philosophical consultant, how do you think about sort of your ultimate value orientation? Are you comfortable with the concept of wisdom intersecting with that? Is it, and I'd just like to hear some reflections in relationship to your own value commitments in the work that you're doing. And maybe I missed that because I've been trying to bounce around to all the lovely talks and participate in them. But I'd just love to hear some reflections in relationship to that comment and your identity and your work in the Wisdom Project and other kinds of domains.
I don't know if I understand the question, but I have mentioned already 3 times Francisco Varela, whom I have known forever and who I still miss because he died young, and his approach to the biology of cognition and his approach to ethics as a Vipassana meditator himself. And I don't know exactly what makes you fall in love with virtue when you practice Vipassana meditation, but that's a value that guides me and sometimes exhausts me, like always trying to be ethical. It's not easy, even in simple situations, like fighting with my sisters about my very elderly mom care.
I'll just say very quickly, virtue epistemology might be the framework that I bring to bear on my work as a philosophical counselor. I believe in the inherent goodness of virtues and wisdom and all of that. But it's not a theoretical thing for me, Greg. It's more of a thing in my own nature, because I am a long-term practitioner of wisening. And this is a kind of religion for me. And that informs everything. Oh, there's my timer, but we can go over. And Sigurd. Michael, do you want to say anything about answer Greg's question before we go over to Sigurd?
I think you're muted, friend.
I'll yield to Sigurd and Eva at this point.
So I wanted to follow up on what Ingrid was talking about. I've been following Gabriel Cram, who's writing a book on polyvagal theory, and it's really taking it, I think, in new directions. And for those who don't know much about it, essentially what it's talking about is this part of our nervous system has sort of 3 layers historically, the oldest being something where we shut down as a threat when we're in threat. The next level is being active, fight or flight. And if one of those platforms is dominant, it completely limits our range of possible thought into one to deal with things through the framework that part of our nervous system is telling us is going on. And as mammals, we have a 3rd platform of safety and connection, which unfortunately, especially in our society, is not very well formed because we're so often under feelings of things are not safe. But if that is the predominant platform, then the person can have these other systems say, oh, I feel hearing safety, or I'm feeling this, and not be overwhelmed by it, but can keep it directed in a way that is not reactive, can actually take some time to evaluate the decision, say, oh, I have choices here. This way looks like the best way to move. Yeah. So neurobiology of connection is coming out sometime later this year. I would highly recommend it.
Okay. Eva, just so we know, we're into the next time frame. We're eating some of it up, but we'll take one more comment or question from Eva, and then we're going to have 20 minutes or so for Q&A later. So each of the three presenters have a 3-minute thing we want to present, and then we'll return. But Eva?
Okay. Greetings from Finland. It's almost midnight here. I'm on the bed. And I've been listening very, very keenly on this discussion. I know Mike Mascolo, he has been a visitor in our university, and I also been in contact with Iris. This is the first time I heard about your model and your empirical study. I found it very interesting. I have many, many questions, but I think I must ask them later. One question I want to put is why did you chose Igor Grossman's model of wisdom? Because there are also many about 20 other psychological models of wisdom nowadays around, and we are actually here in Finland. Here in our university, we have a big research group. We have creating a model, second order meta model of those first order wisdom models. So I think we know quite well. There are plenty of them. So I want to know, why did you choose Grossman? Thanks.
Okay, I chose Grossman because as an organizational consultant, I am frustrated by the lack of integration and synthesis of many of the very valuable concepts that have been generated in the last, 50 years by psychologists. And as an organizational consultant, I deal with clients that are very sophisticated in the effort I have to make to really understand where they're coming from, because they read different books and they don't know how to integrate. So for me, I feel reverence for the effort that Igor Grossman and a total of 9 empirical researchers on wisdom did to create this model. And the model was based in a survey of philosophers and psychologists working on the topic of wisdom. If there is any other model where, I could see if the Wisdom Project applies, I would do it. But I was like a little girl waiting for the 2022 book on wisdom, a handbook that Sternberg was publishing, Robert Sternberg. And then I was so disappointed when it was more of his theory, or this person who works with him, Glock theory, and not trying to oversee what is that is happening. So I greatly appreciated when in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, John Vervaeke went through all the theories of wisdom. And even though he didn't speak about the common model of wisdom, basically he was trying to find integration of those theories in what he calls the cognitive styles of wisdom, chapter 42 of the video series available on YouTube. But I'll be happy, Eva, to work with you and explore. And also I have to say that the wisdom model do not per se impacts the Wisdom Project. The Wisdom Project comes from my tinkering for years with teams of professionals that have projects and where I integrated tools from psychology and from change management to make them succeed. And the difference that the Wisdom Project makes in the work that I have done for decades is that for the first time, I was serious introducing psychological distancing and emotional landscaping.
Great, thank you. Very good answer, comprehensive. Just so we know, we went 6 minutes over in that Q&A. So now we're going to turn to the 3-minute things, and let me fix my timer so that I keep good time, because now our final Q&A is going to be shorter. So Okay, here I go. I'd like to take my 3 minutes to describe what Iris likes, this word, super agency, a skill that I think is central to cultivating virtues that strengthen the process of becoming wise or wiser. To simplify, I'll describe the two root skills in most meditation practices: narrowly versus broadly focused attention. In the case of narrow focus, one selects any singular element within the total field of awareness as the target for attention, notices when attention wanders and brings it back. Each cycle of attentional focus, notice of wandering, and refocus is like a repetition in weightlifting, a meditation rep. Broadly focused attention, alternately, selects the entire field of awareness as its target, differing only in scope. Same thing, you wander from the totality to some narrow subthing, you realize that, and you come back to the broad focus. Meditation reps of either type grow the meditative muscle of attentional focus through repeated exercise, and either skill contributes to the other. They're virtually the same. During practice, impulses threaten to hijack attention, but with practice, individuals increasingly recognize, detach from, and they get that distancing that Iris was talking about, and are able to then regulate impulses. This is the mental equivalent of fasting, not acting on hunger impulses, but here on any impulses that arise during meditative training. Long-term meditation practitioners, I call meditation virtuosos, develop powerful control over their own minds. That's that neurological self-regulation that somebody brought up. Ordinary people routinely act immediately on first-order thoughts and impulses, not much better than stimulus response type determined animals, but are able to pause, reflect, and exert some second-order control over their behavior, which is a basic form of human agency. However, meditation virtuosos cultivate a far greater capacity for higher-order control over their own agency, for what I call super agency. The Buddha, an exemplar of this, whether or not one really is enlightened, famously asserted his meditation cultivated ability to think or not think any thought he wants to think or not think, and to have or not have any resolve, which is a mega intention, right? A resolve is not just an intention, but a fixed intention. He could have or not have any resolve he wants to have or not have. This is an ability that extends over emotions and affect and virtually any other element of our psychobiology that may be theoretically or in practice influenced through voluntary training. The meditation virtuoso also brings these meta-attentional skills off the meditation cushion, something Iris emphasizes in the Wisdom Project, and into the agent arena, I'm going over a little bit, into the agent arena relationship in all their doings, which enables the highest degree of a kind of global attentiveness to whatever matters when attempting to discern what satisfies Aristotle's right rule that I mentioned earlier in any given case, without any internal noise. What's the right thing to do, when, where, with whom, and why? For these reasons, I think this sort of meditation training can contribute tremendously to the wisening process, as it can facilitate the cultivation of any of the virtues required for it. And that's all I have to say. So now let me reset the timer just so we try to keep on. And who's next, Iris or Michael?
Who's next, Iris?
Whatever, you want to go first?
I'll go first. So the question that we're answering here in these last 3 minutes is, how can we cultivate wisdom? I want to build on what Rick just said. First, I want to say that in the past several years, I've come to this idea that there is only one question, and every other question is a footnote to this one question. And the one question is, what is the good? What is good? Is what I am doing good? How do I cultivate the good? That is the only question, I think. Everything's a footnote to it. Now, what does that mean? It means that that's point one. Point two, wisdom is not a mysterious concept. It's not some hovering something that it exists above us. It's not a guy sitting on a hill or anything like that. It's part of our everyday action that we cultivate in everyday life. That's point two. How do we do it? We do it, in my view, through a process of reflection and action. Reflection and act. We act in the world, we experience the world. We stop. We reflect. We ask, is this good? How do we make it better? We interact with other people. Is this good? How do I make it better? I interact with other people. What do you think? What makes this good? The person slaps me and tells me that I'm doing is bad. I have to reflect on that. And then I bring those reflections into my action. And every time I bring those reflections into my action, I develop what Rick is calling this agency and this super agency and the increasing capacity to bring my thinking, feeling, and acting under control and into correspondence with higher order representations of the good, the moral, the worthy, etc. That's, in my opinion, the process. It's simple, it's complex, it's simple to state, it's complex in action, and it's not mysterious. Iris.
Well, I used to be a super fan of going to 10-day retreats at the Vipassana Center in Western Massachusetts. So when they invited me to do the mindfulness-based stress reduction training, I said, no, that's impossible. You cannot teach mindfulness in 8 weeks. But then, I was a student in those days. I was going for a PhD. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And so I worked for the Boston Public Health Commission that was using mindfulness to reintegrate people into the community. And I was amazed what could be done in 8 weeks. So I did the same in 2008, trying to help professors adapt to the changes in education and bring them to their teaching. And I also was very surprised what could be done with 40 weeks. So that gave me the courage to do this little platform of 7 weeks, 2 hours every week. And I am amazed of what we are seeing. So when I contacted Michael, I was trying to find a way to prove what I was seeing happening with people. And I was so fortunate that Michael was interested. And now we know that what we are calling the 5 perspectives, humility, adaptability, and virtue skill set for the cultivation of wise decision-making apparently works. And I hope we will be able to continue doing that and expanding that. And I'm going to look at, Eva, your model of wisdom to see, because if it's really working and with the mind tools that I listed and that I'm using in the protocol, we are developing these 4 skills. It should work also in your wisdom model. So it's easier. We can democratize wisdom. In 1820, there were 9 people who couldn't read or write. Of 10 people, only 1 could read and write. Right now, it's the opposite. 9 people can read and write. Today, so we spread literacy. Can we do the same for wisdom? The Wisdom Project is telling me that it's not a crazy goal to democratize wisdom. Kicking meditation out of the meditation room, kicking psychology out of the psychotherapy room, and make it public, easy to share and to wisen our different life worlds.
Great. So the 2 of you took less than 3 minutes each this time, and I took more. I'll say one thing. Michael, you said, what was the main question again? Am I good? How am I good? What's the good? I forget how you worded it. You're muted.
Any version of the question, what is the good? What is the good? Is this good? Why is this good? Can I savor the good?
Okay, my first ethics teacher, who's still a good mentor of mine, I remember him summing up the course, the Introduction to Ethics course, by saying, the ethical prescription boils down to 2 words: be good, which is kind of like the one answer that are many different versions of the prescriptions. All right, so you heard enough from us. We want to hear a little more from the other participants here. Floor is open. Unmute yourself, speak, assert, query. Mitya, you don't have to raise your hand. Just unmute.
Sure. Just a few seeds to see what your minds would turn it into. There's this concept of sovereignty that Jordan Hall and Schmachtenberger and other people have been kind of popularizing a bit. And it sounds, I've been playing with that and developing into attuned sovereignty. right? Not just sovereignty in the sense that you basically described, right? What is the goal? How can I make sense of the environment, the widening, right? And how can I best navigate and pursue it? But also the attunement part, which is how can I best relate and kind of align with altruistically with other beings, and the context and, concentrically in this, cognitive cone-like expansion all the way to, the planetary ecosystem. So it seems like this attuned sovereignty is maybe a bit more expanded definition of wisdom that's not as familiar to people. Because if you say wise, in my experience, people say like they've been exposed to a word, but a new word kind of creates a little crack, right, in people's minds. And it seems to me that the Seligman's kind of idea of virtues and kind of the 6 ones tied into the 6 domains in process-based therapy, right? Attention, you talked about that. You talked about the self. You talked about emotion, cognition, motivation, and behavior, right? Those 6 dimensions. It seems to me that the different virtues Seligman kind of pointed to can be organized around those 6 domains, and being able to navigate consciously through that seems like attuned sovereignty, right? Which is an extended way of basically saying the same thing. I feel that's what you've presented here. So it seems, again, consilience, right? That word. It seems it's all pointing in a very, very similar kind of direction. So I wondered if you're aware of those kind of, lines of thought, or what would you develop them further into or point out?
The only thing that comes to mind when you say that is when you use the word sovereignty, and I don't know exactly how the gentlemen that you were talking about are using that term. It always brings to mind autonomy, individual self cut off from others, if you will, in internal control. The addition of the term attunement takes that and just totally relationalizes it, and that's just beautiful.
For me, it's very important, even though we haven't talked about it today, that the way I have approached this cultivation of wisdom, this wisening process, is by defining everything so the agent doesn't have to be a body. The agent doesn't have to be an individual. The agent could be me and my sisters, me and my family, me and my community. And together with my community or my family or my sisters or by myself, I can practice with those mind tools. And one of the beautiful things that the Wisdom Project has brought into my life, to my great surprise, because some people have said, how come that you are so smart, Iris? You believe in all these silly things and go to these very long retreats, somebody said to me a while ago. So I was very surprised that to the moment I have had 2 of my sisters and 5 of my cousins in the different cohorts of the Wisdom Project, some of them more than twice. So my family is improving thanks to the Wisdom Project.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what you said, Mitch. It all resonated very well with me, and I think it's consistent with everything. And I think Michael put his finger on it, that normally when we hear things like sovereignty or agency or autonomy, we think of the individual in isolation. That's just part of our kind of cultural history in the West. But we are more and more, as a culture, at least those of us in this space, are recognizing the interdependence and interrelationality. And like Iris said, me and my sisters there's one kind of agency there, so we're part of a distributed network, a distributed cognition. That language alone is an interdependence phenomenon for almost like for telepathy, so bringing a heightened awareness to the interdependence of agency is important. But also, I think many of us, or many people in general, I don't know if us is the right word, what group does that mean? But many people in our culture need some kind of supports to enhance their individual agency, to rise up to the level where they can be better interpersonal agents or parts of interpersonal agency networks. So, I mean, every one of us is a node in a network, and many of us need to improve the node first But a lot of the ways in which we can do that is by, of course, relating with others. So it's a combination. That's what I would say. I don't know if that lands well with what you were curious about. Okay. And others?
It's me again from Finland. Iris, it came to my mind actually that your model reminds me more about Judith Gluck's model or wisdom. Do you know it? It's not so much of Grossman's model, and this came to my mind because I was wondering the exercises you have included in your training program. There are many. I suppose there are many tools which actually train emotional capacities or tools.
Yes, very important. Every session has the cultivation of a particular emotion.
Yes, and Igor Grossman is heavily against including emotions in his wisdom model, but Judith Gluck is in the opposite side, and she.
Okay, so I'm deviating from Grossman, and thanks to you, I'm going to be learning from this person, Judith
Gluck. Judith Gluck. She's living in Austria.
Thank you. Yeah, emotions are. I'm inspired by the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett and her How Emotions Are Created paradigm, and the idea that the brain has a budget and that we have to respect the budget. The brain has to make the heart function, have to lead digestion. And so there are too many things that cannot be done because of the limited budget. But I'll be happy to learn more because self-regulation of emotions is a big, big topic within the Wisdom Project.
Yeah, I agree. So I think Judith Gluck is your important reference.
Thank you.
Eva, can you type her name in the chat so that we get it right? All right. Meanwhile, others?
This is going to sound weird, but I'm kind of weird anyway. Listening to you all talk, and we're talking about the individual and the group and the growing of agency beyond the self. I'm wondering if we could hack the curation of prophilicity, that second order of selfness that is, again, very individualistic, to maybe curate a prophilicity of other selfness. So this paradoxical emergence into a group, but not group think, but just group identity. I don't know if that's going anywhere, but
what is the word, Justin? What word do you use?
We have a tendency to curate a prophilicity of ourselves, especially with social media and things like that. So we have a second order of ourselves that is the avatar that we create or the character we play. And I'm wondering if we could almost hack that, and rather than it being an individualist curation of a profile, or that it broadens out more to like you said, the sisters, the family unit, or the community or group. I don't know if that's landing well at all, but just something I was thinking about when you guys were talking.
Well, my approach, remember I said I used to be an engineer. I used to be a systems engineer, an electrical engineer and systems engineer. So my approach is how to engineer the spaces where we can cultivate wisdom. And the technical term to do that is how to engineer socio-technical systems that have a particular purpose. And there is a lot of literature coming from Eva Kallio's land, Finland and Denmark and Sweden, of people doing that type of work, activity theory. How do you design the cockpit of the airplane so there is an optimal relationship between the pilot, the co-pilot, the control tower, etc.? So there is a lot of literature on how to design those socio-technical systems so they produce smoothly the goal of the system, giving space for errors. And my favorite movie is Gravity with Sandra Bullock, even though she seems she's isolated. the system has been designed so when her shuttle fails, she can create remedies to use the Russian shuttle to change things. So that's good design. That's good engineering. And that's my invitation, that we can collectively do some type of engineering for the spaces where we make wiser decisions.
I want to say, in response to what you said, Justin, that I like what you're saying about, and what Iris is saying about the agency of something broader than the individual, the whole. It's interesting to me that so much of intellectual discourse, the history of intellectual discourse, is a history of the tension between differentiation on the one hand and integration on the other, between diversity on the one hand and unity on the other, and that we tend to bifurcate those things when they really are part of the same thing. And I think what's so important about what Iris is saying is she's using the concept of a system. And a system is both a series of differentiated elements that are in relation to each other. The individual person is differentiated elements coordinated, and then you and I are you and me coordinated into. So all I want to say is whatever profile we come up with as a group, it must in some way have that dynamism of diversity and unity within it, rather than reducing it either upward or downward.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Well, thanks to both of you, though.
It's a really great. It's a great question, and I think it's pointing toward the model of the emergence of new kinds of distributed cognition networks that function as agents that involve more than just one individual. And well, I think it was Descartes who said that philosophers participate in the great conversation, which is across the whole history of philosophy. They're individual nodes, which is what Michael was talking about. That's been the model. I agree, I disagree, whatever. My theory, your theory, tweak this, that. But we're at the cusp of what Greg, who's not here anymore, calls the fifth joint point, which is the emergence of new kinds of agents. And these are collective agents with the internet and AI and all of that. So I'm curious to see how that unfolds. Like teams are a kind of trans individual agency, right? Orchestras are, all sorts of things are. So
lovely.
With this networking thing, all this new possibility, it's really fascinating.
I don't know how close we're getting to the end.
I think.
I'm sorry.
We have 2 minutes left.
Okay. I'm in opposite to this claim. For example, in Nazi Germany, of course, you were involved in those vicious ideology of Nazism, but you can also make another decision to go another direction, and then you are acting as an individual agent. It is always possible to act against the others.
Yeah, until we get absorbed in the Borg.
Can I just say something in response to what you had said before, Rick, about your professor who said at the end of the ethics course, be good, it's the basic principle. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie A Serious Man. A Serious Man. It's a Coen Brothers movie. And in that movie, a young boy who's going to go through a bar mitzvah goes to the rabbi, this old rabbi who has been around for a long time and is learned, and you can't get an appointment with him. And they open the door and you have all these artifacts, these old artifacts and books and everything. And he's so scary, this rabbi. And he goes in and he sits and he waits for the rabbi to say what he's going to say, these wonderful words of wisdom. And the rabbi says, "Be a good boy." That's it.
Well, I would love to end on that note because this is 4:45 Eastern Standard Time. I want to thank Michael and Iris especially, but also everybody else who participated, and just being here listening is a part of the participation. So namaste, as we say in India, and ciao, as we say in Brooklyn.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Ciao. Take care.
Niva, you didn't write the name of the author on the chat.
I think she did. Judith Glock, I think, from
Judith
Austria.
Glock. That's,
I
oh my God. Judy
think so.
Glock?
I think so.
Oh my God, she did. I don't like that model. That's so interesting. I was complaining about the 2022 book, and it was a handbook, and the only theories were basically hers and Robert Sternberg. I was very unhappy, like a child waiting
I'm
for
wondering.
Santa
I'm wondering
Claus.
what would you? Sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead.
wondering what would you make sense of? I think Seligman and his work, right? It's failed to replicate. Like empirically, when people looked at the factor structure, they saw interpersonal virtues, self virtues. Like it didn't. I don't know if you're aware of Seligman's 6 virtues and the 28 strengths and stuff like that, but we use that as a roadmap after the first dialectic into dialogo session by Vervaeke. The same group of 4 people that met during that workshop for 2 years, we kept meeting each month. And basically what we're developing right now is taking each of the strengths, having a dialogos around it, like defining it from 4 different perspectives, bringing in quotes, having a dialogue. Now we're planning to feed it into ChatGPT as well, with kind of a set of questions to bring in the literature. And basically what we're aspiring to end each session with is a definition of a virtue framed in this polarity aspect of deficit and excess. And what we're trying to then do is use those definitions to develop self-rating and other rating psychometric items. Because in the research, I was wanting to ask about the data. I think it would be really valuable to get other rating as well, to ask each person to choose who is the person in your life that you know and trust the most and who knows you the best, and to get both of those ratings, right? Because I'm imagining a person who is not humble, that will influence all of their virtues, in the way they rate themselves. So having someone else who you would also know their virtues of, because if there's 2 people who are not humble, you cannot really trust their ratings of each other, right? So I'm wondering, what do you make sense of this? Like using Seligman's map of virtues, I find it's the most comprehensive one I've seen. Magnanimity is in there, all kinds of virtues I learned for the first time, getting definitions about them, and then using that as a way to kind of assess different aspects of virtue, of wisdom.
So basically you are saying that virtue is a trait, almost the trait of
a character strength. Like I separate personality, which is in a way inborn, changed with psychedelics, with shamanic experience, but it's there, stable. Then you have character, which develops in the same way that our immune system, we have an inborn immune system that like we're born with, it's genetic. And then on top of that, through experience in life, if you're born in India or in Slovenia, you're going to have a different immune system developing on top of that, right? So in that sense, character is something that develops on top of personality into kind of skills, virtues, capacities. And then on top of that, you have skills, I would say, or knowledge or stuff like that. Mm. So I guess what my question is I think, because wisdom, it's multifaceted. It's like a gem, and you can, like a tree, if you ask how many parts does a tree have, you can say just one. You can have, it's a branch, it's leaves, it's whatever. You can go into thousands of parts and different cells. But for me, I think people need different layers of the model, right? They need a simple one with like 3 components. Then those components unpack into, 2 or 3 each. And then for me, this 28 is the limit of this map, right, of the continents of the world. For me, it's enough virtues, right? And they're not overlapping that much, and they're organized into 6 different ones. So we've been playing with kind of using that as the map, and then trying to define each of the virtues very kind of simply, precisely, and then unpack them into different kind of exercises, into different, questionnaires.
I know of Seligman's work, but I cannot say I'm familiar with it.
Okay.
In the way we are using virtue in the Wisdom Project, in the analysis of the data from the Wisdom Project, is counting the number of times that somebody names a virtue, but we don't focus on, we don't have any exercise where we try to define or grow or that's not the...
Okay, so you
in
allow
another
people
group,
to name their own virtues, right? And you extract the
no,
virtues
when they
find.
start narrating, we don't ask, we don't name the... So it's like the game of the glass bead game, you know, people play. The experience is an experience of playing, okay? And then while they play, somebody said in the cohort that ended, one of the cohorts that ended last week, oh, it took me 7 weeks to understand that what we're doing is just jazzing, not trying. He was trying to organize everything like we organize the curriculum when we are taking a graduate class. No. So we are just playing vis-a-vis our framing of the project, reframing it with the hope, as Verviki says, of being transframed. And then we count the number of they name at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, and then 6 months later, and that goes up. So that's it. But I intuitively, I would say that by definition, virtues are difficult to grasp because of their connection with every other virtue.
Yes. I think what we were exploring, like the let's say ore vein that we're mining, is second order virtues, right? Because you can learn about how courage is between cowardice and recklessness, and then you kind of get, okay, so this is how it feels like courage is, right? Like sympathetic, parasympathetic, you know how to get that balance. But then there are other virtues, and it's with completely different domains, right? Humility, kindness, prudence, self-regulation. And this is where I think those 28 kind of strengths from Seligman and the 6 main virtues come into play, right? Because then you can see, just to read them out loud, it's their knowledge, courage, humanity, justice, sophism or temperance, like in Vervaekian speak, and then kind of transcendence, with spirituality and the wholeness and altruism. Those 6 virtues Seligman kind of points out, and then each of them breaks down into multiple ones. And for me, that's where we're kind of playing with and relating with. For example, on the level of personality, you have 6 traits as well, hexaco, right? So how the personality traits link with different virtues. I guess why I'm saying all of this is, I think it's...
Are you a psychologist?
Yes, and a data scientist, yeah.
And what type of psychology do you practice?
I'm focused on attuned sovereignty, this thing that I mentioned. I'm developing this, and I'm working as a psychometrician, basically. I'm helping develop ways to measure different... For example, I'm doing sociometry in schools. That was a very beautiful project with all 6th graders, and creating actual pre and post maps in the beginning and the end of the school year, the social networks. So psychometry I'm doing mostly, but other than that, I'm developing this attuned sovereignty kind of model and trying to measure that.
Psychometrics of what with the school children?
We had their well-being, like multifaceted well-being, because we basically defined that, because the buzzword for most people that I work with is mental health and well-being, and like they want to get into a certain state, even meaning in life. And there's consensus in the scientific literature about how to measure that, like cognitive affect, meaning in life, satisfaction with personally meaningful projects, sense of connectedness, love. Like you can describe all of these things to people, and all of them say, yes, that is good. I want that. How? Or what I experience, people usually get more depressed, because then they figure out, oh, it's not just about me struggling with my anxiety and depression. I also have a lack of meaning in life, and I don't have connections. And so learning about all of these dimensions of well-being tends to make people more depressed. And for me, I try to drop the question onto the functional level, because people can agree with that. But then what can I do? What can I learn that's not based on my personality, that's not based on how I was raised up as a kid? It's not based on, things that require deep, profound transformation, although that's important. What can you do on this functional level? Mindware, basically, from the concepts that you were using. What are the skills you can learn to kind of tap into that? So that's what we were measuring. We were measuring well-being, and then we tried to kind of extract what are those different capacities, and they align beautifully, like with the different ones you point out. I think it's arbitrary in a way. Do you want to choose 6 concepts to frame it in, or 4 or 3? But the things we're pointing at, that's what I take from this talk, which is really valuable for me. I really think we're pointing in a very similar direction.
I would
for
love
many
to
different
get
sources.
to talk with you more and learn.
I would love to. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to teach.
Thank you for taking the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to teach personality psychology
Mm.
when I was doing my PhD, and I hated it. I hated
For
it.
me, I hated the part that's making it very deterministic. It's like, this is how you're born. This is stable.
You know why too? Because every time I take a personality test, I have a different result.
Yes. I was really happy to see your longitudinal metrics. I don't know if you've heard about experience sampling as a methodology.
Say more. No, I don't. I am an organizational consultant. I'm not
Okay.
a researcher.
That's where life happens, right? That's why I love. You're kind of a clinician for organizations in a way.
Yes, thank you. When I called Michael, it's because I was seeing this data and I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Yeah, so, I think you would appreciate, because it's easier. I mean, I've done a bunch of studies myself, and that takes time. Designing the instruments, filling it out, getting consent forms, ethical approvals, getting the data, analyzing it, writing about it, visualizing it. That just takes too much time. So what a lot of people are doing is experience sampling basically uses your smartphone to, instead of having like a long questionnaire in the beginning and then at the end, or like every now and then, you get simple but highly focused and sometimes even customized questions to kind of fill out throughout the day. So you can get on your smartphone a notification like 4 times per day, a simple question. Usually, instead of saying from 1 to 10, you have a slider. So you can just drag it from like one extreme to the other extreme. For example, for virtues, you could have if you faced fear today, how have you responded? And you could have like cowardly or reckless, right? And you can get this data for free in a way, because it's very low cost. It takes 3 seconds per day. It gets delivered to people's smartphones, which they always have with them. And you can track it for like a month or 60 days, and you can get very, very rich data. And you can, like, if you set up the systems in advance, you can just visualize all of that as it's happening, right? And people can see that, and that adds a whole feedback loop, right, of reflection. So I think I'm seeing a lot of people moving into this direction. The problem right now is, in terms of software, there's nothing like a Google Forms for this yet, right? Not a simple thing. You can just plug in your questions and get it delivered. Most of the things that exist, I've played with them. They were open sourced at first, and then they got paid. And people are requesting such absurd amounts of money for platforms like this. And this is part of the reason why I got into coding.
Where are you located?
I'm in Slovenia. Maribor. Slovenia, yes. Just
and you work independently, or you work for an educational institute?
I founded an institute for applied sciences, Maribor, where I'm employed. And then right now I'm consulting the Ministry of Education in Slovenia, the Department of Youth, on reframing hate speech. Like, that's one of the projects I'm currently working on now. Before, I was working on a project I don't know if you've heard about restorative justice, but it's also one way of dealing with. Yeah. So I helped with a project with restorative justice, introducing it into 4 schools in Estonia and in Lithuania. And I helped design this kind of measurement instrument for it. So I'm basically doing stuff with research. I'm like editing a few handbooks. I'm also spending a lot of time listening to your podcast and like Verveki and stuff like that. But the thing I'm most working on when I'm not distracted by other projects is this attuned sovereignty thing, and trying to, like you said, I think I'm gonna quote your thought there about making wisdom common, right? As literacy. Getting back to the 9-10. That's what we should be doing. If you look at any problem, ChatGPT, pollution, conflict, someone kills their spouse, whatever, at some point in the movie, and I'm so pissed about movies and series We could have positive role models. We could have stories that are fun, but there's no wisdom. And every time a movie, and it's like I'm beginning to watch the movies. Okay, the main problem that this movie is trying to spin up could be solved in this exact moment if these two people stop, took a deep breath and do this. All of it will be prevented. But no, we have to watch killing and shooting and stealing and whatever. I think this is a massive niche. If we manage to write a script or like some content for this and then find someone to produce series out of it, I think the Wisdom Famine, I think this would be a very popular series. We should. I remember your fellow. I think it was Rick. He mentioned he was a chief philosophy officer or something like that, employed somewhere. Series should have those. They should have. This should be a position. Mandatory for
I
all
am
this
an optimistic, and I believe that. Listen, on my desktop, I have something that Plato said about why not use writing, because the skill that had been accumulated throughout the ages in memorizing long stories, the epics of the past, was going to be lost. And he was right.
Wow.
It got lost.
Wow.
But happily, now we can read Plato's writings. And the same happened with the printing press. Less than 50 years after the printing press was created, Martin Luther put the list of recommendations to the church, and that generated the war of 30 years and a lot of killings. So technological change brings revolution, brings turmoil and chaos. And we are in a moment of big, big change. But that doesn't mean that we're completely lost. And so we need to be hopeful, like the same way that we created literacy in the world, writing and reading literacy. We can create wisdom literacy. We can.
I believe we can. In a way, we need to treat it as I think this is the hard work that people like you and the whole field of literature needed to do. You need to get to a point where people, where this is so distilled, when there's so many evidence, when there's so many stories, there's little thoughts that can turn into memes, right? Making wisdom common, whatever. That at some point people just say yeah, fine, we need to wear seat belts, right? That was a battle. Or not smoking. That was a battle. But at some point, people are just okay. We need wisdom. Yes, otherwise the world is gonna blow up.
For me,
here's how we do it. Let's do it. Let's move on.
For me,
there's other
it was
adventures.
a big success today that after 2.5 years of talking about wisening
is beautiful.
I heard Rick saying it 5 times. Finally, Michael still not saying it. He hates the term, but for me, it's a triumph.
Wisening. I like it. Yeah.
And to wisen comes from Middle English, is the ability to see, to lead, to teach, to project, to discover.
Wissen. Yes.
Wisen.
Yeah.
And then we can engage in the act of wisening when we are pursuing.
I would even say that when you were first sharing this idea, what came to mind for me was the same as maturing, right? Growing up. That's the concept. Grow up. People use that, right? And in a way, growing up is biologically driven, right? The escalator of biology brings you all the way up to adolescence and then drops you off there. Then other people like social organizations, the laws, whatever, then they push you a bit, right? If that falls apart, and in wartime, it does fall apart, all of the social systems, people digress back to adolescence, right? But with social systems, we push it a bit further to kind of civility. But I think after you get to this point, you need to, it's wisening. I think it's like growing up. It's like becoming civilized, but it's self-directed. No one else can do it for you. You need to do it. And here's the trick question, the chicken and egg. How can you encourage, not make, but encourage, incentivize, tempt into, seduce people into wanting to become wise, wanting to grow, wanting to, develop, mature, because they need to want it. So how do you create conditions that make it possible? For me,
the condition of everybody that comes to the Wisdom Project is that they have a wicked problem. They have a daughter
Yes.
who suddenly became
Yes.
rebellious.
Yes.
They have
Suffering.
They have
Yeah. Pain.
a
Yeah.
planned retirement
Okay.
project that doesn't fly because they don't know how to keep the structure of
Yeah.
doing things except by going to
Yeah.
a job workplace.
I think that's
They
a very
create a
wise
business.
observation.
They
True.
create a business. So that's the secret
True.
sauce that I'm using here.
True.
Something
Because
that is
otherwise it's personal development, right? It's I want to get better and stuff like that.
no,
It's
no,
a
no. It's
different.
not personal
Yeah.
development. It's bringing
Suffering.
because we
Yeah.
have had many of these
Wicked
mind
problems.
tools since Buddha, and how good
Yes.
they are done. My meditation teachers, I used to have a bunch of meditation teachers. I came from a meditation place in London, and they came at the beginning of the summer. And as soon as I sat with them, I entered into deep samadhi. It was amazing. And then they went July, August, and September. They went to travel the States, and they stopped back in Boston. And when I sat with them at the end of 3 months of being with people, they were not the same people, and the meditations were not as deep. So even these people who have devoted their lives to live in retirement in a monastic life for 20 years lose it easily. So I think we don't have to do that anymore. We can do what Goenkaji did, bringing Vipassana and insight to the world, what John Kabat-Zinn did, bringing mindfulness-based stress reduction that now is used for many to the world. And I hope to be able to contribute my little piece with this poisoning. Yeah. All right. So I hope to learn more about you.
Yes,
Let me
I
write
think
you.
at some point.
My email is Dr. Iris at irisstamberger.com. And perhaps you will be interested in coming to one of the wisdom courses that are starting.
Is it online?
Yeah, it's online.
Okay,
it's live online. And I have hours. I just finished a class where I had, there were 3 different classes, but I had people from Sweden, from Thailand, from Argentina, from,
Beautiful.
from Sofia. From Bulgaria, but they live in Sofia. Okay.
I don't think you wrote down the email in the chat. I wrote down iris@irisstamberger.com, but I don't know if there's a dot or something. Could you write it in the chat, maybe?
Dr. Iris didn't I?
Did you send it in the chat?
Oh, no. It's just that I have Eva Kelly, everyone. Now you can get it.
Okay.
Dr. Iris at irisstamberger.com. And your name is
wonderful.
Again?
Mitya. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Mitya Chernikov.
Okay. Have a wonderful night. It's very late where you are. Okay.
Yes, 11.
Thank you for coming to the presentation.
Bye-bye.